Hi, my name is Braxton Cosby. I'm the CEO of Cosby Media Productions and Star Child Comics. I'm a multi-award winning author and best-selling author of various titles such as Broken, The Cape, and Star Child Comics. You can find me and my company on Instagram with Cosby Media Productions. You can find my personal profile on IG at Braxton A. Cosby. And of course, for anything all related to Cosby Media Productions, you can find us on our website www.cosbymediaproductions.com. You are watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. Of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We're joined today by our returning guest. He has not been on the show for 3 years, which is a long time when it comes to online interview shows. He's, of course, the CEO of Cosby Media Productions. We are joined by the ever-talented Braxton Cosby. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, Kurt. Appreciate it.
It's been 3 years. It's been a while. I'm sure a lot has changed with you, but for those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to the show today.
Well, I'm the CEO of Cosby Media Productions. We are a small press company of publishing books in fiction and everything, nonfiction, fantasy, and the like. We also do inspirational books as well. And our comic imprint, Star Child Comics, we have over 12 first issue comics and a couple of graphic novels as well. I myself have contributed about 5 books to our superhero universe called the Cosby Media Productions Dedicated Superhero Universe, the CMPDSU. 6 authors with 18 novels and 6 different comics of superhero fiction. And yeah, I think while I've written over 20 novels, 4 screenplays, 5 comic scripts. So our company has published over 30 authors with 60 different titles in ebook, paperback, and audiobook formats.
That is a lot, especially I remember you talking about the universe 3 years ago there as well too. And of course your lovely wife stopped by to talk about her side of the business, and hopefully everyone is doing well with your family in that respect. But talk about the origin story of Cosby Media Productions. Walk me through that exact moment you decided to launch Cosby Media Productions, and what was the specific problem you were trying to solve in the media landscape?
For me, I was already a published author in 2010 with a small publisher down here in Atlanta. And my first book that I wrote was Protostar, book 1 of the Star-Crossed trilogy. And it done pretty well, had won an award with Reader's Favorite, and I felt pretty good about it. But then the publisher decided to close its doors, and they gave me the rights back, and I shopped it around again, got it picked up by, I've got a literary agent, got it picked up by another publisher. And as we were working on the second book of the series, which was Supernova, we had some differences in opinion of where the direction of the book was going to go. And I decided to just kind of get the rights back and said, hey, I do it on my own. I was just going to be self-published on my own as an author. And then I ended up getting my book, Fat Free for Life, which is based on my health and wellness paradigms, with me being a physical therapist, personal trainer, and a certified nutritionist. I said, hey, you know what? I got that picked up by a pretty solid publisher in Charisma House. And when the book came out, I really didn't get any traction. So I started going, man, I've been published by a small publisher, a larger house, and I just really don't see a lot of the advantages of doing that. So I decided to kind of just spin it up myself, start Cosby Media Productions in 2014. And my goal always was just to be a partner with authors. We don't really consider ourselves like just a publisher only. We try to give authors the best opportunity to get their works and their dreams out. We give them what we call the industry standard of formatting, editing, book cover, and design, and also just like story formatting and script consulting. So my thing was to give very very strong royalties to those authors for the works that they're bringing to the table, and just kind of partner with them and give them all the advice and help that we can so that they can really be successful. We've had multiple authors become Amazon bestsellers. We've had some award-winning authors as well. So I feel as if I've done my part. Like I said, being on one side of the publishing fence for so long, I just didn't see all the advantages of it. So I wanted to give authors a place that they can really call home, get their works out. We've had authors who have brought multiple works to us after their successes, and we've never put out a call for submissions in the 10, 11 years now of being a publisher. It's all been word of mouth. So people just kind of come to us and say, hey, my friend was published with you guys. Would you take a look? And then, we just have a simple submission format where it's the 3 first chapters and a synopsis. We read it over. And those works that we feel have the best opportunities to either A, become a TV series or a show or a limited series, or even make it to film, those are the ones that we really like to play with, because we feel as if they have the best opportunity to capture an audience. So now that we're in comic books, we feel like we're kind of taking that next step towards getting closer and closer to the silver screen, because comics, as you know, are a way to really expound on storytelling. So it's not just having a nice story in those pages, but also designing those panels and getting those action pieces out there, as well as rich dialogue. So I really feel like a lot of what the writers bring to the table and what we try to push is becoming your own director and producer in your story when you write that comic script, and then pairing them off with just the right artists and illustrators and colorists in order to bring those stories to life. So, I feel proud of what I've done and what I continue to do with authors and creatives alike, and hopefully we'll just continue to keep pushing those stories in the near future.
Yeah, it's always interesting to, especially from a TV film side of things. It's fun to do that, but it's also hard to get produced and get it out into the eyes. With the advent of social media, with the fact that we have so many different streaming platforms and everything like that. How are you trying to get your content in front of those masses and fight through maybe a niche that isn't quite filled yet?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just really just saying, hey, what is the niche now? What's the hot niche? Because it's changes so much. What I'm starting to see now is a big pickup with manga for comic books. There's a huge interest, obviously, with anime. Anime has exploded, and I'm so grateful because, like, a lot of the shows that I really didn't catch the first time around, like a lot of Gundam, I've kind of gone back and looked at now because I have a Netflix account, and I'm excited because it's been great. I'm an old Robotech fan, so Gundam and Robotech kind of go hand in hand as far as the storytelling elements in my mind. So, manga has really taken off with anime picking up, and so we're starting to produce some manga titles. Chris McCauley, who is a author of the and kind of a pusher of the story, the Stokerverse, which is basically from Bram Stoker's series of vampires and things like that. He's actually a part of um, that little work group that has put out comics and things like that. He actually brought over his big fighting robot series called Nexus Astrum, which you guys can anticipate coming out very soon from us. In that comic book, he's going to do the novel and the comic, and I'll talk a little bit about that and our approach now to being a hybrid publisher. But we just finished up that comic book, so that's complete. Really great team I paired him with, Leo Rodriguez and his team of animators. They did a fantastic job on that comic book. So we're excited to jump into that arena and start going out to some of these conventions that are a little bit more skewed to the anime fan base. And that way we can tap into that.
Let's dive into this comic book imprint that we've hinted at here, especially with Star Child Comics. I know we had talked about it like 3 years ago, where you were trying to get the universe kind of solidified from our last conversation. What is this comic book imprint that you keep hinting at?
So right around the pandemic, like I said, Coyote Champion, Keyshawn Dodds, Lawrence St. John, and Daniel Payton had already contributed so many novels. I think at that point we have maybe like 15 novels in the CMP the superhero universe. And when the COVID came around, conventions that kind of closed the doors. It was a little dangerous to do that. So we just kind of held up and was like, hey, what can we do next with our superhero series? We've got these books out now. We've got a fan base brewing. And my direction was like, hey, why don't we try to do comic books? And I remember somebody else was like, okay, well, are we going to retell the stories in comic book form? I said, no, I'm always thinking forward, Curtis. Like, let's just keep going forward. Let's add to what we're doing. So essentially, if you've got a two-book series, which I did at the time. I had the Cape Book One, Cape Book Two, Overdrive. I said I want to make my comic book the third book in that series, you know? So even though it's a comic book, it's just another book in that series. So Kaio Champion had two books of the Majesties of Kane series. So he did the next book in the comic book was in the Majesties of Canaan. Lawrence St. John, four books in the Metatron series. He brought out Metatron Terror at the Track. Then Keyshawn did Judgment War at Home, which was basically fifth book in the Metatron in the Menzuo series. And Daniel Payton had three books in the Bark series, and he did Power Struggle, the comic book. So we paired off, well, first of all, we paired off with a few artists, and then we ran a Kickstarter just to kind of see what the interest would be. And then when we got the Kickstarter funded, we really realized, like, man, okay, people are really hungry for this. So we do what we call hybrid publishing, where we start our stories either in comic book or novel format, and we continue to offer different platforms for the fans to read. Because I was noticing when I went to some of the conventions that people would come to the table when we only had novels. I said, I don't really have time to read novels, but I'm usually doing audiobooks or I'm doing comic books. And I was like, man, there's something here. So that's why we started really pushing. And so now we pride ourselves in being a hybrid publisher. And there's not a lot of small press out there that does that. So when people pick up, let's just say they pick up one of our comic books, like I've got Steel Rain here, which is part of my Bounty Hunter series. When you pick up the comic book, in the back, people, when they finish the comic book, say, hey, well, where can I get the novel? Because Steel Rain is the comic book is the prequel, and the novel is the first book in the series. So we gave them a little area where they could just scan the QR code and go and pick up the actual novel. So we did this in all of our comics. And so when they finish the comic book, they can always go back and get the novels in the series. And so we've given them an opportunity to catch up if they're just jumping into it with the comic books. And the same goes for the novels. The novels actually have the pictures of the comic book in the back of the books as well. So that's what we're doing. We're just continuing to expand. We've got some stories outside of superhero series, as you can see, Steel Rain, Bounty Hunter, hardcore sci-fi. I just told you about Chris McCauley. He's got Nexus Astrum, and we're going to do a simultaneous release of the novel, which basically in this whole sci-fi manga universe that he's written, he's got these big fighting robots and this war that goes on in Nexus Astrum. The novels kind of chronicle the older days where the war just first started, and then the comic book parallels that in the future where they are now. So it's kind of like a read back, catch up kind of thing, and we'll just keep kind of dropping the book and the comic book just like that in tandem. So we're really, really excited. Kaio Champion wrote his vampire series that takes place in Africa, Johannesburg, Africa. It's called ANVK, which is African Ninja Vampire Killers. And then we also got my contribution, which is Broken, the dystopian young adult series. Book one is the novel. Book two is the comic book. And then book three, which we just released, is the 62-page graphic novel. So we're just continuing to push the envelope of creativity just to kind of tell people stories in these worlds that we have, and just cultivating that and just seeing how much we can expand it and make it grow.
Do you find the fact that you're jumping between these different mediums maybe a little confusing for people? Maybe it's a little daunting, especially when you jump from a 24-page comic to a 400-page novel and things like that. That would be like where am I in this series? Even though it's numbered 1, 2, and 3, it's like, well, do I remember these characters? That can be a little confusing and daunting for first-time buyers.
It could. So, most of our buyers and fans come in the convention, so I get an opportunity to really talk about that and kind of bring them up to speed on where we are in the story. So when they say, hey, what's broken about it, I start to tell them, say, hey, it starts here, boom, boom. And then what I did, because when you write, you have to be sensitive to the fact that what you just said. People may be just jumping in at a graphic novel or maybe the novel, and they want to know where to go from there. So you have to kind of bring them up to speed. And you write these stories that they can stand on their own, but you really want people to grab the entire package. So the novel, obviously, just being the foundation, it kind of speaks for itself. You can read the back synopsis and get an idea of where that starts. But if you the comic book, if you read Broken, the comic book by itself, it's a standalone story. There's a 3-act structure. There's a protagonist. There's the inciting incident, and then it takes them into the journey through the act two, and then it finishes up with act three. So it's very complete, even if it has a cliffhanger ending. It tells its own story. In the graphic novel, what I did is I basically kind of made a page right in the beginning saying like where we are now. So basically, I catch you up without giving you all the details of book one and two in the Broken series, but saying, hey, here we are now. This is kind of where we are, and now we're going to move forward. So each one of those books just piggybacks off the ending that happened in the previous story. And so I think it makes it very easy for people to continue. And plus, what we do in the comic books was really nice. Like right at the top, like say for instance, you pick up Bark, Power Struggle. It'll say following the events of Bark book three, and then to say what it is. So you really kind of know how to connect everything and go forward. And people have done a pretty good job at following up. And you know, we'll just continue to do it because people really love having that variation. I can't tell you how excited they get when they know they're like, oh man, oh, it's a comic book. Okay, well, oh, let me try that. You know, they just want to try something new. I think that a lot of fans are just looking for something new and different, especially when they come to conventions. They want to just be a part of something that they really didn't expect to be when they come to the convention. They want something new and fresh. And I think our idea of hybrid publishing is exciting to a lot of readers.
You mentioned audiobooks as well somewhere in our conversation there. Is that another avenue that you're approaching? Is that like a simultaneous release, or is that something you're trying to gear up for other content?
Oh, no, that's normally what we do. Normally when we do our stories, we release the novels and then an ebook paperback. And after a couple of weeks, after the success, we recruit a voiceover artist who will do our audiobooks for us. And then we release those as well. So people have an opportunity to kind of enjoy the books in whatever space they want. I'm a huge fan of audiobooks myself, and I just get excited when our voiceover artists actually do them because it gives me an opportunity to kind of catch up on the entire novel from that author.
One of the major factors that has changed since we last spoke has been, of course, AI in the media landscape, and how interesting and horrible that has been in many different avenues. I say horrible because all of the comic people that I know have had all of their work stolen, etc., from AI, and it's been brutal. And you look at the content, especially on an Amazon platform where you can release books and all that other stuff, but is it a good book? And you don't know if it's been written by AI, etc. Now, based on our past conversations, I know that's not a factor when it comes to Cosby Media Productions, obviously, but what's your take on AI in the creative space?
I mean, honestly, we have advanced so much with technology that I just don't know when it's going to end. I don't know when it's enough. You know, everybody plays around like, oh, I'm going to make a robot now. I'm going to put a neural chip in your head. I'm like, we've seen this stuff already, and it wasn't good in the movies, the way these stories ended. So I don't know why we're playing with this. And I think, you know, it's the same thing. Yes, a computer can do a fantastic drawing or a painting or a comic book, maybe, or even tell a great story. But there's something about the human spirit and the soul being poured into a work that makes me want to get it. You know, I want when people say, "Oh, you know, this was an original work," or they made it themselves. That make because I know I'm sharing the essence of the work that the artist put into their work. That creative went, put together an outline, decided they were going to tell this story on their own, and that's what I want. Or even when they decide they're going to, even if they're drawing something, like I have a fantastic picture of Ahsoka on my wall over here that this one artist had drawn a couple of conventions ago, and she did it herself. And I want to be a part of that. I want that hand drawn human being created work to put on my wall. I don't want something with AI because I know it's going to be flawless. I know it's not going to have any imperfections in it. I love to know that a human being worked hard to put it together. It's not perfect. None of us are in anything that we do. None of us are in our existence. And I want to share that work and that journey and that struggle with that creative. So that the AI stuff to me, if we use AI to assist us and maybe come up with an idea or a perspective in some way, that's fine. But to write the entire story, I can tell you what, there's a lot of scripts now and screenplays that are being written by AI, and you can tell because that human touch is not there. That connection, a robot doesn't know how to do that. They don't know how to connect. They're just figures, statistics, and correlations. So they just put whatever you say out there, but they don't know, you know, what is it to be orphaned on another planet? You know, what is it to be betrayed by your loved one. They don't understand how a human responds to that. And I think only a human being can do that. And, really, we're as writers, we're supposed to write out of our heart, what's near and dear to us. They say you write out of your experiences and you write from an angle of what you feel you're an expert in. So if it's your life, you're an expert in your life. If it's your relationships, you're an expert in that. If you're a professional and, like a physical therapist like me, I wrote these 13 principles in my book based off of researched articles that I did off of my life experiences of being a therapist. So I'm an expert in that, and I'm giving that information to the reader. So I don't know what an AI is an expert of because it just kind of goes, it grabs things and it brings them together. But I want to know that, it's a shared experience for me. That's just what I'm about. I'm more about experiences. The older I get, the more I appreciate that. And I want to give that to the readers as well.
It's the personal connection. You have to have that. You have to be able to actively communicate and speak, and you're doing that either through face to face, like what we're doing here, or you're doing that through your works, through your comics, and through your novels, etc. It's great to see that still that connection, and there will always still be that connection. Whether or not these AI overlords take over the planet, whatever. Um, there's enough dystopian in the world, in the real life. We don't actively need it.
No, at all. I mean, seriously, it's crazy.
You mentioned Broken here, and I do want to dive into that because that's the more recent works that you have created here. Give us a quick 30-second synopsis of Broken and why it was an important story for you to write.
The world, year 2035, all out nuclear war. Nobody knows who started it, but it definitely ended with 70% of the population of the planet being destroyed. That's plant, human, and animal. People rush to the coastlines for fresh water and try to survive. Money means absolutely nothing at this point. And so the world currency is turned upside down, and a military conglomerate known as the establishment actually comes out and starts to enact its own currency, which is a human one. And they basically activate slavery again, but it's based on a class system this time, not on ethnicity. So if you don't have any money or power or wealth, they actually enslave you, and they use people as the currency. So they trade. This is across all the continents at this point. And a young girl named Kisa Donovan, who's been separated from her family, her mother, her father, has now become a surrogate parent to her 11-year-old brother. She's 16, her brother's 11, and they live in these, what they call these precincts and these slave pods in these settlements, and they're separated by ages. So now she has to kind of watch them, and they all have little roles. Issa is a scout, so she has to sit up in a tree outside of the settlement watching for would-be attackers. And you say, well, who are these would-be attackers? Well, with the fumes of the nuclear fallout, the ashes that you obviously ingest over time, three things happen to you. One, you become insane and you like a madman, kind of like Mad Max kind of guys, where you just called hoarders and actually pillage the land for resources and they just kill you on sight. Or you could become a mindless zombie type creature we call ashers, although they work more like a hive mind. And then 1% of the population actually gets extrasensory perception, and they are called alphas. And so Kisa is starting to have these visions and dreams and not understanding what's going on in her world as she continues to evolve. And now she is starting to hear signs and hints that there is a resistance that is forming that wants to overthrow the establishment. And her first step is that she's got to get out of that settlement and go into the Badlands and figure out what's going on. So, excuse me, the Deadlands, and find out what's going on. So that's kind of how our story starts off. The hope is that she can connect with this resistance and figure out where her father is and her mother, and kind of put together the pieces of her life in some way, shape, or form. And that happens with book one, and then book two takes place immediately at the cliffhanger ending, spoiler alert, of the first book, and it starts right in there. And what I wanted to do so I kind of have these three factions: the establishment, the ashers, and the hoarders. And in book one, I really took a deep dive into building the world of Broken as far as the political kind of landscape with the establishment, how they're run, what their organization is like, and the connection and the interest in Kisa. And we also talk a little bit about a good majority of the hoarders and how, answer the question, are they really as crazy and chaotic or as we think, or do they have some type of a organized way of living that we just haven't had a chance to explore yet? So with those really kind of taking the forefront and the Ashers kind of being in the back seat, the comic book gave me an opportunity to really push my artists. I worked with Ram Silva, who was an amazing illustrator, and Julio Caballero, who was my colorist and letterer. I really was able to push the emotional boundaries and the colors and the story and the action sequences with those Ashers because I really wanted people to see how they operated. So I gave a little bit of a background on them, how they do have this hive mind that they work from. And I was like, hey, since we've gotten a lot of the story foundation in the novel, let's jump in and really give people some great zombie action. So that's what I did. And then the third book, which is the graphic novel, takes place 6 weeks after the end of the comic book. And there's a whole nother story to tell and really kind of cleared up some things about Kisa's character that people were like questioning, not really understanding where she was because my initial motivation with writing Broken was to basically just give something to my daughters. I have 3 daughters, and I wanted to kind of dedicate a story to them. Uh, the nuances of being a young teenage girl. I basically have an adult, a teenager, and a young, almost teen, a preteen going on right now. And so I wanted to give them something, taking the little parts of their personalities and putting them together inside of this character named Kisa. And with that, I wanted to also be able to have a character that a lot of people can connect to because she's been somewhat orphaned, because now she is a caregiver, and she also has mental health issues that she is encountering with, imagine that's the whole thing. It's broken. This whole system of her life has been broken uh, into pieces by this event of what they call the big drop when all these nuclear bombs went off. So um, it's been a special story for me. It's been very well received, and it also won a finalist for dystopian fiction in the American Legacy Book Awards, and it was the highest category winner for dystopian fiction in the Book Fest Fall Book Awards. So I've been really happy with it. It's when I write, my next book is supposed to be my favorite. That's my rule. So I don't finish it until I feel like it's my new favorite. And Broken has done just that. And not just the book itself, but just the series. The comic book is fantastic, and the graphic novel really kind of jumps in. The characters are on display in there, but the world of Broken is more established. I bring in a new antagonist character that I think is really cool, a headhunter that's actually looking for Kisa. And then I also give a little bit more depth to the way that the Ashers move. And I introduce another character type in the graphic novel that I think people who've been following the series are going to really be excited about where it's going in the direction of the story, building up to me working on the novella, which will essentially be book 4 of the series.
Wow. It's interesting because I've had a few authors come on about their own dystopian works. And I think it's an interesting genre itself. But what do you think the most misunderstood aspect about dystopian and post apocalyptic genres that people who don't follow them misunderstand?
I think that they really think that they're only one thing. They feel that they're either fantasy or they're science fiction. And I think they don't understand it. It's actually a mix of both. The fantasy elements, uh, true to the aspects of fantasy, is really taking you into characters that don't exist and probably couldn't exist, which is why it's called fantasy, and telling a story through that, where science fiction is actually taking some application of science and turning it into fiction. Whether it's real or not, you're taking those applications and you're building those worlds that are outer worldly. So they're a little bit outside of the universe that we already know exists, and you push the envelope. So I think what's nice about dystopian is that you can have, especially in Broken's case, you can have these Ashers and these hoarders, which is more of the fantasy piece, but you can also have the science fiction about how this has affected human beings and changed their genome to become something else. So there's this really nice, and then also I talk a good amount with the novella that I'm working on now is how this all took place. Where's the science behind the nuclear fallout? And you start to wonder, is it something that can really happen? I think of something like The Last of Us, where the creators actually did a really nice job of talking about fungus and how these fungi, if they were, if it was ever to really get to this point, can be very powerful because I think on a microscopic level, when you look at fungi, it is really, really science, really for a lack of a better word, it's kind of gangster. You know, the kind of way it can just take over something. And you look at it small, you see this little patch of fungus, you don't think it's a big thing, but what was going on in that small little universe is huge. So they basically just took that, put it on a macro scale of how it would affect human beings if we had this powerful fungus. So they took science and they applied it to fiction and they made a fantastic story. So that's really what dystopian is like, hey, the world that we know has ended. Where is the scientific application of how we got here? And then with if you're creating something within that, where is the fantasy? My original introduction into dystopian fiction was with Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Not a lot of fantasy there, but there was a lot of science fiction, burning books and what that did to human beings as a whole and how it kind of put us back in the dark ages and still trying to tell a great story that was unique, but at the same time making it very real and personal. Because I think at that time I didn't like reading, so I was like, "Ooh, a book about burning books. I'm all on it." And then I ended up getting the story, and it was just so interesting that I started really kind of falling in love with those type of dark stories that were a little off the beaten path of the basic To Build a Fire and Silas Marner and all these other books that were just totally boring to me. So it really kind of set me on my path to enjoying science fiction.
I was more of a fantasy into. I mean, I've read sci-fi and all that as well too. So I was Bradbury, Asimov, those classics, James Bond. I got into the Dragonlance series for my fantasy, so that was my first jump into that. And so it's amazing how you look at what was written in the 60s and 70s and 80s and you compare it 40, 50 years later to what's currently happening today, and it's running parallel. There's so many avenues, and it's scary. It's in a certain extent it's scary, but as long as we remain educated and we enjoy what we enjoy and we share with what we enjoy, then at least the next generation will have something to read, hopefully.
That's the great thing about books is, I mean, books are here forever. Once they're out, they're out. You can always pick up a book. I remember when I was starting kind of get into young adult fiction because I was writing and when you write something, you should read something. That's like the rule. If you really want to understand the genre, you need to read it. So I was working on Protostar, and at that point, I was looking up authors who had kind of signed big book deals and how they were going about creating these worlds with young adult fiction. And that's when Divergent came out. So I found out about Veronica Roth and how she had, basically had taken classes in writing and graduated and got this book submitted and picked up by a publisher. But I think I just had such an appreciation for I found that book. I went and bought it. I read it. It was amazing. And I remember looking at it in bars. I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of a book called Divergent? And they were like, no. And I had to go and like kind of dig it out of the shelf. It was like in there sideways and like nobody really knew about it. I read it and then it just exploded. But it took about a year before people really started reading it. So again, I talk about a book that was released. It had a little fanfare to it, but nobody really picked up it. And when it caught fire, man, before you know it, it had been picked up. It had been turned into a film and she was doing really great. So a book can be out there forever. And then somebody just comes along and gets behind the idea of it and says, hey, I mean, obviously look at what we're doing now with Lord of the Rings. I mean, we can't make enough movies and TV shows off of it. And those books were written how long ago?
And it's always up to the creative interpretation as well. And that's the hardest part because you have purists that enjoy the content as is, where there can be no change whatsoever to said content. You look at said Snyderverse people, and then you look at a bunch of others where it comes to, I'm taking this beloved classic and I'm turning it into a different genre. And you see that with stage plays, from stage plays to screen to whatever. It depends on what you enjoy, and it depends on what will set your creativity in maybe in that direction, and who knows. And as an author, as a writer yourself, and working with many other authors, writers, and artists and things like that, I'm sure that building worlds, building universes is can be challenging and daunting, but it's a matter of how do you creatively come together to make what something will work.
Right. And it was crazy because when you talk about making something work, um, the superhero universe, the CMPDSU, everybody had their own stories they were kind of bringing in. So what we did is we started in each one of the novels for the superhero stuff, we would kind of reference the other characters in that world. And then when we finally decided to have our first crossover, it was me, Kaio Champion, and Keyshawn Dodds. We brought all of our superheroes to our first book, which is Infinity Seven, uh, Gods Among Men. And that was our first foray into crossover. We had 14 superheroes in one novel. And we had to sit there and basically I had to kind of talk with them. They trusted me to write the outline. And we all kind of said, okay, this chapter, Keyshawn's going to write this chapter, Kaio's going to write this chapter, I'm going to write. And we had to really communicate with each other because we were writing other people's characters. And we had to make sure that we had the same voice and tone that they had. And then we also had to go back through the entire book after we wrote it. And we had rules where we're going to say the word like said, not say, and we had to keep it all in the same tense. So there were all these rules of writing so that when you read the book, you don't know, nobody's voice is changing. It's exactly the same tone. And that way it feels like one complete work that is just written by one person, but it's actually all of us collaborating. So I'm proud of that because we ended up getting book one done with Infinity Seven, which is basically, like I said, it's our Justice League, it's our Alpha Flight, it's our X-Men, it's our Avengers. And then book two, which is War of Gods, really kind of was our bookend to what we were creating. Marvel has that whole phase thing going on, but we brought ours with stages. So, stage one started with Menzuo, and that went all the way down to, let me see here. We ended stage four with the last Metatron comic book, Terror at the Track, and stage four actually kicks off. We start off stage four with Infinity War of Gods, and now I was finally able to finish the second issue of the Cape series of comic books. So the first issue was Hellfire, illustrated and colored and lettered by the fabulous Bruno Abdias, who's actually moved on now to DC, the Cyborg series. And book issue two now was done by Salazar, and we worked together furiously on that. And this was a kind of a handoff. Paladin, my main character, had been through book one and two of the Cape. Also been in Infinity Seven, books one and two, and also comic book Hellfire. So it's like taking a moment, taking a step back, and bringing this young group forward called the Fabulous Five. And so I introduced a whole new set of young characters, kind of like what's the Young Justice kind of a thing. And so they are part of that stage four building of superhero fiction. And Marcelo Salazar, who also worked on Metatron, the Terror of the Track comic, he also did, that was for Lawrence St. John. He also did Majesties of Canaan, Tribulation for Kaio Champion. And the Menzuo War at Home comic with Keyshawn Dodds. I trusted him and brought him in to carry the torch, and with my wonderful little youngsters from the Cape, and he did a fabulous job with that one as well. So we're just continuing to build out our superhero stories, and we've already got Keyshawn working on his next Menzuo comic, and Lawrence St. John is now working on his next Metatron comic. So we're just going to keep building out what we've already established.
And then 3 years later we'll be talking about the movie production of said universes, etc. And Denzel will be sitting right beside you there next time and all that.
That would be amazing.
Braxton, we could continue talking about everything else that you're currently doing, but I think this is a good point where, let's find out where we can find you, support you. Of course, not only yourself, but everyone else that is part of your amazing crew there when it comes to the Cosby Media Productions and all the amazing works that you're putting together. How can we help support you in that respect?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And I would say the best thing to do is just go to our central hub, www.cosbymediaproductions.com. There you'll see links to our social media with X, Facebook, and IG. But really, you'll be able to just scroll down. We made the website so easy to navigate. If it goes by genre, it'll be fantasy, new adult, young adult, inspirational, poetry. We have some fantastic poetry by Jeff Oliver. And we just have a lot of great things to offer. So you'll find something if you're a reader. And I really say if you're a reader and you're really interested in getting into some stories that have never been told, or you're just looking for something new and unique, we got a whole fantasy series of dragons and stories by Daniel Payton. We've got James Meservey with his young adult fantasy series. I know you said you were into fantasy, Kurt. We've got some hard sci-fi storytelling by William Hayashi with the X trilogy, the what is that? The Archangel X trilogy. So we've got a ton of stuff. Superhero fiction. If you're interested in something, you name it, we got it. And also the dystopian middle grade kind of series. We have that books 1 and 2 of the Restart series by Drew Samuelson. So I know I'm leaving a lot of people out, but like I said, over 30 authors, we've got a ton of stuff to read. So you'll be able to navigate, find what you like, be able to read the synopsis. And if you don't want to buy all of our comics you can purchase on our online store. But if you don't want to buy something there, you can actually click the link that takes you to Amazon or Barnes & Noble and purchase there as well.
Awesome. Well, Braxton, like I said, this is amazing to have you on. Got to get you back on, and maybe not every 3 years, but something.
Yeah, we got to pick up the frequency.
Date or whatever the case may be, for sure. But that unfortunately ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talk. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others. I'm sure it's a lot higher. I just lost count. Give me a break on one person. You can find it at our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's TWO. But the website is going through a complete overhaul, so it's not quite working right. But go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. You can find all of our interviews there and our short content as well, too. Our podcast you can find at twogeekstalking.podbean.com or just search Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.